Join me as I dive into the eerie world of the supernatural and attempt to uncover the truth behind the spooky encounters at my office. Have you ever wondered if the strange creaks and groans you hear in the office hallways are more than just the building settling? Do you sometimes get the feeling that you're being watched, even when you're alone in your cubicle? If so, you're not alone. Paranormal investigations in office settings have been gaining popularity, and it's not hard to see why. The thought of something supernatural lurking in the shadows, waiting to pounce, is thrilling and terrifying all at once. I've spoken to numerous employees who've reported strange occurrences in their offices. From unexplained noises to sightings of ghostly apparitions, it's clear that something unusual is going on. One employee told me about the time she saw a door swing open by itself, even though she was certain she had locked it. Another employee reported hearing whispers in the supply closet, despite being the only person in the room. Some of these occurrences can be written off as mere hallucinations or the result of an overactive imagination. But what about the cases where multiple people witness the same event, or when security cameras capture evidence of paranormal activity? It's hard to dismiss these incidents as mere fantasy. Many people claim to have seen shadowy figures lurking in the corners of their offices, or have heard disembodied voices whispering in their ears. Some have even reported finding strange symbols etched into the walls or floors of their workplaces. What's behind these bizarre occurrences? Are they the result of some kind of curse or hex? Or is something more sinister at play? What's fascinating is that many of these paranormal encounters seem to occur in areas with high levels of stress or tension. Could it be that the energy of the office environment is somehow attracting these supernatural entities? Or is it simply a case of people being more prone to hallucinations when they're under pressure? In one particularly chilling case, a group of co-workers reported seeing the ghost of a former employee who had died on the premises. They claimed that the ghost would appear to them in the break room, always at the same time, and would nod or smile at them before vanishing into thin air. The weird thing is that the ghostly apparition was always dressed in the same outfit, right down to the same hairstyle and accessories. It was as if the ghost was trapped in a time loop, reliving the same moment over and over again. Another investigation revealed evidence of poltergeist activity in a busy office. The entity was known to throw objects, slam doors, and even cause electrical appliances to malfunction. What was most disturbing, however, was the discovery of a series of cryptic messages scrawled on the walls, seemingly written by the entity itself. The messages were always cryptic and nonsensical, but they seemed to be trying to convey some kind of warning or message. But the most shocking encounter I've come across has to be the case of the haunted elevator. According to witnesses, the elevator would sometimes stop on the wrong floor, or would take people to floors they hadn't selected. Some even reported being trapped in the elevator for hours, with no way to escape. The weird thing is that the elevator would always seem to malfunction at the same time every day, almost as if it was being controlled by some kind of supernatural force. The evidence gathered in these investigations is both fascinating and terrifying. It's clear that something supernatural is at play, but what exactly is behind these encounters? Are they the result of some kind of curse? Or is something more sinister at play? As we delve deeper into the world of paranormal investigations, we begin to realize just how little we know about the supernatural forces that surround us. These encounters serve as a reminder that there's more to our world than meets the eye, and that sometimes the things that go bump in the night are more than just our imagination. Thanks for joining me on this journey into the unknown. If you have any spooky office stories of your own, be sure to share them in the comments below. And if you're new here, consider subscribing for more paranormal content. Part 1. The Whispering Office. Eve worked at the same office for years, and it always felt like a second home until the strange occurrences started. The first incident was minor, a low hum in the air after hours, a static-like buzzing that seemed to emanate from the fluorescent lights. Even though all of them were switched off, the building is just settling, I told myself, trying to shake the irrational feeling creeping up my spine. Then, about a month ago, I stayed late to finish a project. Everyone had left, and the silence was comforting at first. But around 9:30 p.m., I heard a faint whisper drifting down the hallway outside my cubicle. It was subtle, just on the edge of hearing, and I couldn't make out any specific words, but there was something undeniably human about it. When I peeked into the hallway, it was empty. Maybe the cleaners are around, I thought. Though I hadn't seen them, I forced myself to shrug it off, but the whisper returned, louder this time. A chill ran through me as I strained to listen. The sound seemed to be calling my name, although it was distorted, like a voice underwater. The final straw that night was when my office door creaked open, slowly. I was certain I had locked it. In fact, I clearly remembered the click of the lock. Trembling, I grabbed my things and bolted out, leaving the lights on in the project unfinished. But as I hit the elevator button, a feeling of dread washed over me. The display blinked 8, then 7, then back up to 8 as if the elevator itself were undecided on where to go. Since that night, I've heard others mention similar occurrences. Strange symbols have appeared in the supply closet, scratched into the paint with such precision that they look carved. I didn't believe in the supernatural before, but now, each time I hear the whisper or see the strange marks, I feel the weight of an unseen presence. It wasn't until I heard about the ghost of a former employee that my fear turned to something darker. It was said that he appears in the break room at midnight, staring with hollow eyes, before slowly vanishing. His spirit, they said, had been trapped by some unfinished business. I scoffed at the story until last night. I saw him for myself, his expression blank and timeless, a figure caught in endless loops of death and despair. And then, with no warning, he turned, and his gaze met mine. Part 2, The Ghost in the Break Room. After that night, I couldn't stop thinking about his face, pale, hollowed out eyes set in dark, sunken sockets, and lips that twisted into something that almost resembled a smile. I hadn't stayed past 5 p.m. since then, but last night, deadlines forced me to stay later. Around 11:30, the break room seemed to call to me, an irrational urge pushing me toward it. My hands were sweating as I walked through the darkened hallways, illuminated only by the faint glow of the emergency lights. I don't know why I kept going, but something in the pit of my stomach twisted, urging me forward. Even though my mind screamed at me to turn back, and there he was, standing next to the coffee machine, just as still as I'd seen him the first time. His clothes looked worn, like they were washed out by time itself, and his hair hung in a greasy mess over his forehead. A part of me wanted to scream, but the air felt thick, pressing on my chest until I could barely breathe. I tried to retreat, but my feet wouldn't move. He raised one hand, stiff and jerky, pointing to the ground next to him. I followed his gesture, not sure what I was looking for until I saw it, a set of faint, smeared symbols on the floor. They were in the same strange script I'd seen scratched into the walls of the supply closet. This time, though, they formed a clear message. "Help me." The words were etched deeply into the linoleum, as though clawed into the very fabric of the floor. I looked back at the apparition, and for the first time, his expression changed. His hollow eyes widened, fearfully, his mouth opening as if he were trying to scream. But there was no sound, only his twisted, strained face, contorting in horror as if he were seeing something I couldn't. Then his body jerked backward, slamming against the wall with an unnatural force, before he vanished altogether, leaving the break room empty. I didn't hesitate this time. I ran, stumbling through the dark halls, only stopping once I reached my desk to grab my things. That's when I noticed something new, an email notification on my computer, timestamp only a minute earlier. Even though I hadn't been near the keyboard, the subject line was simple, asterisk, "You can't help him," asterisk. There was no sender listed. I clicked on it, half expecting my computer to crash, but the email loaded, containing nothing more than a single line. "He's mine." The screen glitched for a second, flickering in and out, but it stabilized, and the email was gone. No trace of it remained, not even in my trash folder. I looked around the empty office, feeling the temperature drop, my breath coming out in visible puffs. Just as I moved to leave, I heard it again, the faintest whisper, as if it were directly behind me. Only this time, it wasn't my name it whispered, it was his. Part 3, Secrets in the Elevator. The next morning, I arrived at work exhausted, still shaken by the events of the previous night. I couldn't shake the image of that apparition's terrified face, nor could I erase the words from the email, seared into my mind like a curse. Asterisk, "He's mine," asterisk. No one else seemed affected. My co-workers chatted idly, as if the office hadn't transformed into a dark nightmare each night after they left. The air felt oppressive, stifling, but no one noticed, except for Max, our usually silent janitor. He was leaning on his mop, watching me with an unusual intensity as I passed by him in the hallway. "You've seen him, haven't you?" he asked in a low, gravelly voice. The unexpected question sent chills through me. I stopped, heart pounding. "I think so. Do you know anything about him?" Max leaned closer, his eyes glancing around to make sure no one else was listening. "They say he's the spirit of Andrew Moore, a former employee. Good worker, real dependable type. Until the last few weeks he was here. He stopped showing up, said he was being watched. Next thing anyone knew, he was found dead right there in the office elevator." I swallowed, feeling a sudden, sharp coldness creep down my spine. "The elevator." Max nodded solemnly. "Security footage showed him entering the elevator that night, but the doors never opened on any floor. They say he was trapped in there for hours, like something else was in there with him, holding him in. When they finally got the doors open, he was dead. Some say it was a heart attack, but others, he trailed off, his voice barely a whisper. Others say he was scared to death." I tried to ask more, but Max turned and walked away, his face pale and lined with an anxiety I'd never seen before. That entire day, his words replayed in my head. By 6 p.m., the office was empty again, and a creeping sense of dread grew within me. But I had to know. I had to see if that thing was really in the elevator, and if Andrew Moore's ghost had been trying to warn me. I pushed the button to call the elevator, my hands trembling. As the doors slid open, I stepped in, almost hoping it would take me to the floor I selected without incident. But as soon as the doors closed, the lights inside flickered, and I felt a surge of panic. The elevator shuddered, then lurched downward, taking me to a floor that hadn't been on the panel. The air felt thick, suffocating, and the lights continued to flicker, casting eerie shadows across the steel walls. I tried pressing the buttons, desperate to escape, but the elevator wouldn't respond. Then, in the corner of my eye, I saw something in outline, faint but unmistakable. A figure stood in the far corner, a dark shadow against the reflective metal walls. His face was turned away, but I knew it was Andrew. I could feel his terror radiating in waves, freezing me to the spot. I opened my mouth to speak, but my voice came out in a choked whisper. "Andrew, can I help you?" Slowly. He turned, his face pale and hollowed, as if he had been drained of life itself. He looked at me with an expression of desperation and despair, his mouth opening to form silent words. I strained to listen, pressing myself against the back of the elevator in sheer panic as he drew closer. He lifted one skeletal finger and pointed to the elevator panel, mouthing a single word, *basement*. The lights flickered, and his face twisted in fear as he looked past me. A low, guttural growl filled the small space, echoing from every corner, reverberating through my bones. Then, with a violent shudder, the elevator stopped, and the doors opened. In the distance, I saw the word basement etched into the wall. The letters dark and faded. As I stepped out, the elevator doors slid shut behind me, and I was plunged into silence. I was alone in the basement, alone, except for the cold air, and the shadow that stretched toward me, curling around my feet as if waiting to claim me. Part 4. Shadows in the basement. The basement was silent, the kind of silence that crawls under your skin and makes your heart pound in your ears. It was mostly dark, save for a dim emergency light flickering weakly at the far end. The walls were covered in a sickly, greenish mold that seemed to pulse, as if alive. The smell was thick and damp, heavy with mildew and something else, a metallic tang that I couldn't place, but it reminded me uncomfortably of blood. A part of me wanted to turn back, to escape up the stairs and leave the building entirely, but I felt drawn forward, compelled by a force I couldn't understand. Maybe it was Andrew's plea for help, his hollow eyes begging me to uncover whatever had him trapped in this purgatory, or maybe it was the shadow lurking in the back of my mind, whispering that if I didn't face it now, I'd never be safe again. I took a step, then another, the sound of my footsteps swallowed by the thick silence. Shadows flickered at the edges of my vision, strange shapes moving along the walls, twisting and writhing. The whispers began again, faint but growing louder with each step I took. They were voices, dozens of them, overlapping in a symphony of anguish. As I neared the emergency light, I saw a patch of floor, blackened as though burned, right in the center of the room. Symbols were scrawled all over it, similar to the ones I'd seen in the supply closet and the break room, but these were different. They were darker, etched deeper into the concrete, oozing with a thick, viscous liquid that I desperately hoped wasn't blood. The whispers grew louder, and the words became clearer. "He watches. He takes. We cannot leave." I froze. The words sounded as though they were being spoken directly into my mind, filling every corner of my consciousness. My heart hammered against my chest as I backed away, my hand brushing against something on the wall. When I looked, I realized it was a door handle, cold and rusty. There were no other doors in the basement, at least none that I'd ever seen on the building's plans. But something compelled me to open it, the same invisible force that had driven me to the basement in the first place. My fingers tightened on the handle, and with a reluctant turn, I pulled the door open. Inside was a small, cramped room. The walls were lined with shelves filled with files and folders, covered in dust, and touched for what seemed like years. As I stepped inside, the whispers stopped abruptly, plunging the room into an unnatural silence. I could feel the weight of something watching me, pressing down on my shoulders as if trying to push me out. But one file caught my eye, marked with Andrew Moore's name. I reached out, trembling, and opened it. Inside was a stack of papers, yellowed with age, but as I scanned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. They weren't just work reports or employee records. They were transcripts, notes from sessions Andrew had apparently attended with the company's wellness counselor. Each page was filled with his accounts of seeing shadowy figures, hearing whispers, and feeling watched by something he couldn't see. He'd reported the phenomena several times, but his complaints had been dismissed as stress-induced paranoia. One note, dated just days before his death, stood out, Subject describes an entity residing in the building, an occupant that feeds off negative emotions and fear. Reports that entity has begun appearing in mirrors, lurking in shadows, whispering threats. Patient seems to be deteriorating rapidly, recommending further observation. There was more a final note, scrawled hastily at the bottom of the page, as if added at the last minute. If anyone finds this, whatever you do not listen to the whispers, do not trust the reflections. I could barely breathe. A deep, resonant growl echoed from the hallway, vibrating through the walls, rattling the shelves. I clutched a file to my chest and turned, heart racing as I stumbled out of the small room. But as I reached the main basement area, the emergency light flickered, then went out, plunging me into total darkness. In the silence, the whispers returned, louder than ever, wrapping around me like a shroud. And then I saw a figure, darker than any shadow, standing between me and the elevator. It had no face, no features, only an impossibly tall silhouette with arms that stretched to the floor. The air around it seemed to warp and twist, as though reality itself were bending to accommodate its presence. I could feel its gaze on me, cold and consuming, and the longer I stared, the more I felt my will slipping away. I took a shaky step back, clutching Andrew's file like a lifeline, but the figure's arm stretched forward, and naturally long, and pointed at me, its whispers growing louder, filling my mind with a single, unbearable command: stay. I knew, deep down, that if I obeyed, I'd never leave this basement again. Part 5. Escape from the Abyss. The words stay reverberated in my mind, loud and insistent. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I was frozen in place, as though some unseen force had wrapped around my limbs. The figure, tall, dark, an embodiment of everything sinister, moved toward me, each step impossibly slow yet bringing it closer in an instant. I forced myself to look away, to tear my eyes from that faceless shadow and focus on what I had to do. My only chance was to reach the elevator, to escape this horror lurking in the basement. Andrew's file slipped from my hand, paper scattering across the floor, but I didn't dare stop to pick them up. I took a shaky step backward. The whispers filled my head, swirling in a cacophony of words and broken phrases. Yours now. No one leaves. Stay. But I clenched my teeth, my mind frantically clinging to a single, desperate thought. Escape. Just get out. Summoning every ounce of strength, I turned and ran toward the elevator. My footsteps echoed through the basement, and with each one, the whispers grew louder, angrier, as if the very walls were screaming in protest. I slammed my hand on the elevator button, heart pounding, praying it would open in time. Behind me, I could hear something dragging across the floor, scraping in a slow, relentless pursuit. I didn't look back, terrified of what I might see. The elevator doors shuddered open, and I stumbled inside, hitting the button for the ground floor over and over, urging the doors to close faster. But just before they shut, a thick, unnatural shadow slipped inside. The lights in the elevator flickered, casting eerie flashes that barely illuminated the inky figure at the far corner, its shape shifting, as if it were nothing more than smoke. It moved closer, and the lights died altogether, leaving me alone in the pitch black with it. I held my breath, pressing myself into the cold steel of the elevator wall. I could feel it watching me, an intense gaze that pressed down on me like a physical weight. And then, just inches from my ear, I heard a whisper, low and jagged. I've been waiting for you. My heart stopped. I was trapped, completely at its mercy, and I could feel its breath, cold and unnatural, as it leaned closer. But then, a memory flickered in my mind. Andrew's note, the desperate scrawl on that last page. Don't trust the reflections. My hands moved instinctively, fumbling in the darkness, reaching for the mirror on the back wall of the elevator. With trembling fingers, I pressed my palm against it, feeling the glass, solid and cold. The whispers stopped instantly, as if the creature itself were shocked, and in the moment of silence, I took a deep breath. Without thinking, I turned, facing the mirror head-on. In the reflection, I could see it clearly: an ancient, malevolent entity, its face an abyss of emptiness, its fingers stretching out, clawed and grasping. But in the mirror, it looked weakened, distorted, as though caught in a trap of its own making. And then I saw him, Andrew, his ghostly figure standing just behind the creature, his face twisted in terror, but his eyes locked onto mine with an urgent plea. It hit me then. He was trying to show me something the creature didn't want me to see. I raised my hand to the mirror, and with a shaking finger, traced the outline of a symbol I had seen in the basement. One of the strange markings scratched into the walls. The creature recoiled, its form glitching and writhing, but I kept tracing, my fear replaced with a grim determination. The elevator shuddered, and the creature let out an unearthly scream that echoed through my bones. The lights flickered back on, and for an instant, Everything was still. Andrew's spirit stood behind the creature, his face serene, and with one final nod, he seemed to dissolve into the air, his figure fading into wisps of light. The elevator doors opened to the lobby, and I stumbled out, gasping, feeling the icy weight lift from my shoulders. As I turned back, the elevator was empty, the lights dim and silent. I didn't go back to my desk. I didn't even gather my things. I walked straight out of the building, not stopping until I was outside in the night air, breathing deeply, savoring the freedom. But as I walked away, something caught my eye, a faint movement in the lobby window. I glanced back, and there, in the reflection of the glass, I saw it again. A shadow, tall and formless, standing just inside the doors, watching me leave. I haven't returned to that building since. I called in the next morning to quit, explaining that I was leaving for personal reasons. I knew the entity was still there, lurking, waiting for its next victim, and as I left that day, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching me, that it would follow if it could. Some nights, as I lie in bed, I swear I can still hear the whispers, faint and distant, echoing in the back of my mind. And when I close my eyes, sometimes I see him, Andrew, standing in the dark, watching, eternally caught between life and death, bound to a place where shadows whisper and the building itself holds secrets too dark to imagine. And I know, deep down, that the shadow still waits in the corners, watching for someone new to stay.